Okay, thanks, Bob. I'm going to go through a little bit of, Bob referenced why we're doing this camp and why you should be interested in this camp. I'm going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into this. And yeah, I'm sorry, you won't be able to see a lot of what's on these slides. This Prezi, there's a link off of CyberPDX.org if you want to play along in your laptops. You can go to cyberpdx.org, and there's a link that's called The Why of CyberPDX if you want to see the full resolution. Yeah.
I wonder if it's okay if we drop the lights in the front. You're not taking notes during this thing. Let's try it out.
Okay. Yep. So before I learn anything, I sort of want to know why I'm learning something, and that's basically what this talk is about. So I'm going to try and give sort of some of the reasoning in terms of why are we providing the content that we are in this camp. And so the four threads of CyberPDX are cryptography, programming, policy, and film. So why study cryptography? So throughout history, cryptography has changed the course of nations. And I'm going to give you some of the examples of this. Does anyone know what this particular document is? Anybody? Throw out a guess. All right. What does it say? Any of you history buffs out there? So this is the Zimmermann telegram. And Decoded, this is what it says. It says, make war together, make peace together, generous financial support, and an understanding on our part that Mexico is to reconquer the lost territory in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. So what do you think this was about? Yes. Yes. Yes, so that's exactly it. So this was Germany contacting Mexico via a U.S. telegram to ask Mexico to be allies so that if Germany got into a fight with the U.S., that Mexico could attack the U.S. as well to distract us so that they could take over Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. So that's pretty bold, don't you think? So this was World War I. And this is the Zimmermann telegram. It's the German foreign minister sending it to the German ambassador in Mexico. And this is in January of 1917. And so at this point, World War I had been going on for a couple of years. This was a contingency plan for Germany just in case. So the U.S. was shipping supplies to Britain, but it wanted to remain neutral. And Germany saw that this was the Britain's lifeline, so they were going to attack all the U.S. ships to basically cut off the supply. But they were worried that the U.S. was going to declare war on them. And so if they did, they wanted Mexico to back them up. So this is the telegram that gets sent. But it turns out the British had captured the German code book. So all those numbers in that first telegram, they have specific words that they map into. And Britain had downed one of the boats earlier in the war that had one of the code books in it. So it could decrypt the entire message. And so they knew what the message said, but they didn't just want to tell the U.S. what it said because the U.S. might not believe them. They actually shipped the code book that they captured over to the U.S. so that the U.S. could decrypt that message themselves. And that's what they did. And so the message got decrypted. The New York Times ran this headline about a month later that Germany is seeking to ally against the U.S. And then the U.S. ends its 2.5 years of neutrality and enters the war. This is the pivotal moment in World War I where we decide neutrality is not for us. We're going to side with the British. And that gets us into World War I. And it actually changes the whole tide of World War I against Germany. Okay. The other thing that it does is that it spawns the dawning of U.S. cryptanalysis. Does anyone know who this person is? It says, ciphers hold no mysteries for her. So I don't expect anyone to know who she is. For basically a century, her story got lost for about a century. This is Elizabeth Friedman, the woman who saved Shakespeare and helped win 2 world wars. Elizabeth and William Friedman are considered the sort of the mother and father of American cryptanalysis. And so that first telegram was a signal to the US that they better invest in code breaking. And so these were the two main code breakers of World War I, because they were the only ones looking at code. Coded messages, I should say, not programming code. That's the programming thread. And so she was very prolific, breaking codes left and right. At the peak, this was during civilian times, she was decoding 20,000 messages per year of encrypted messages. And this is without a computer, right? This is before computers were invented. And this is 50 a day, over 50 a day on average. She would be able to look at these encrypted messages and be like, oh, that's that cipher, and then, oh, I can actually decode that with just a little extra effort. So that's what she was doing. And she was turning the wars. Any sort of criminal activity and war efforts through World War II, she was able to get those messages. And so what we're going to do in this camp is we're going to retrace some of her steps. A lot of the things that she pioneered, the analysis that she does on these coded messages, are the kinds of analysis that we're going to have you do throughout the camp. We're not going to get you up to 50 messages a day, more like 5 or 6, but that's the idea. Okay, and so you might ask, what the heck does Shakespeare have to do with all of this? And for that, I'm not going to give you an answer. I'm just going to say, here's the book. You can read more about it. And I will say that I'm going to give this book away to the first camper at office hours tonight who commits to reading this book and then giving it to someone else after they're done. So that's this book. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. The story about Shakespeare and all of her exploits through both world wars is in it. Okay, so what is this? Does anyone know what this is? Who said the Enigma? So yes, this is the Enigma Machine. This is a German device for encrypting and decrypting messages in World War II. It's called a multi-stage polyalphabetic substitution cipher. And that seems like Greek to all of you right now, but this is what we're going to teach you. You're going to know what this does, hopefully by the end of the day tomorrow, but we'll see. This was secretly cracked by the British in World War II. And because they were able to decode all of these messages, they estimate that the war ended 2 years earlier and saved 14 million lives as a result. Okay? And this actually had a side benefit of a lot of the seminal work in computers was done trying to break the Enigma machine. And we'll see this in our movie tomorrow night. So we'll be showing you the imitation game, and it'll describe sort of the effort that went into breaking the Enigma machine. Okay, so those are 2 world wars that happened well before any of you were born. So does this matter now? And of course it does. Does anyone know what Stuxnet did? So Stuxnet was a malicious piece of software that the US government sent to Iran to make their nuclear enrichment facility blow up. So it was basically spinning the centrifuges inside of the nuclear facility out of control so that they would explode. And so these are the critical pieces in sort of developing nuclear weapons. And so this was possible by the US being able to break the math, to break the cryptography of what's called certificates. So in order for you to trust certain software is actually legitimate, you rely on digital signatures, which is basically what cryptography gives you. And so by breaking these signatures, we were able to sort of infiltrate the nuclear facility in Natanz and then blow up their centrifuges. And this actually had the effect of setting back the nuclear program in Iran 2 years, and they think that this was sort of what forced Iran to the negotiating table. And so this nuclear agreement that Obama signed with them, part of that leverage that we used was the fact that we knew that their nuclear facilities had been degraded. So that's an important piece of that. But the problem with this is that it's leading to all sorts of other things. So when we did that to Iran, we implicitly gave a signal that it was okay to attack other people's stuff through malware, right? This is a legitimate way of sort of going to war with a country without really declaring war against that country. And so we are seeing over the last decade the reciprocation of that. And so we have nation states attacking our power plants, attacking our industrial control systems, breaking into computers that run dams, these sorts of things. We also have other countries attacking our election system. And Bob will talk a lot about this in the next couple of days, where they're attacking all the votes that are counting. They're trying to manipulate our votes. They're trying to basically undermine democracy. And so these are important things that our country needs to protect itself against, which is why we're having this camp. Okay, I'm going to skip this and just talk about some of the goals in the cryptography thread. We're going to have you understand how computers encode messages. We're going to have you learn and apply multiple encryption schemes. We're going to tell you and show you how hard computational problems are used to provide cryptography, secret encoding. And then we're going to identify some of the pitfalls in applying cryptography in the real world, and then the implications that it might have on all of our shared security. Okay, so that's the cryptography thread. The next thread is the programming thread. So why programming? So with programming, with the proliferation of the Internet of Things, basically everything in your house, in your car, on your body is connected to the Internet, we're about to hand over a whole bunch of control to the of the world to software and computer networks. And so this can be an issue. We'll start with this. What do you think this little bracelet is? Has anyone seen this before? Yeah. It's something similar, but not quite a Fitbit. It's a static wristband of sorts. Yes. It is the Pavlok. We've got lots of these. You'd be able to get your chance to get these wristbands. This is the Pavlok. Do you have one?
No.
Okay.
It's terrifying. So you can program it to deliver an electric shock to you when you do something that you want to not do.
That's exactly it. It uses mild electric jolts to help you break any habit. And so you can, guaranteed to see results in 5 days. Strength ranges from a pinprick to pretty friggin' strong. So one of the hilarious uses of this, so there's a guy who's like, I am totally addicted to social media. And so anytime anyone likes me, I want a jolt. If I get a like on Instagram, I'm getting a jolt. Right? And so he had his phone, which has got the social media feed, and then the phone would when it gets a like, would send the signal to the wristband, and then he'd get shocked. And then he'd be like, okay, now I have trained myself not to be addicted to likes, and I'll be good. But the problem with this is, do you care if this thing is programmed securely? I sure hope so, because that's one hell of a prank, right? To be able to do something where you could just shock the person, like if you had one. They're like, yeah, let me just remotely give you a shock. So if you look at this architecture, you look at this and, oh wait, that's protected by Bluetooth. Does anyone know how Bluetooth is protected in terms of security? It's not. Well, and there is a little bit. If you choose to turn it on, there's a 4-digit code. I think it's it's a 4-digit code. So basically, if someone can figure out what that 4 digits is, they got you. So the nice thing about this is that you can take it off if it isn't programmed securely. What about this thing? Does anyone know what that thing is? Pacemaker. You already got a wristband, though. So that's a pacemaker. Do you think that's programmed securely? You hope, but your hopes would probably be dashed. So somebody was able to actually break into that particular pacemaker to deliver an 800, actually not that particular pacemaker, but one of them that actually acted as a secondary defibrillator. So when you are having a sort of a cardiac event, it would automatically send you the jolt that a defibrillator would. Okay, so you would like for that to be secure, but as it turns out, this guy figured out a way to be able to give someone that jolt from 50 feet away, and it was all a result of poor software programming. Insecure programming allowed someone to do this, and this is why we have a camp like this. And so, of course, one of the most famous people with the pacemaker, Dick Cheney, is a former vice president. He was like, I don't want to get assassinated. So he actually turned his wireless networking feature of his pacemaker off. So hopefully he's still alive, isn't he? So probably because he did that. Little preventative care. Okay, well, you're all young. You guys, no one here, well, hopefully no one here has a pacemaker. But you guys probably are more interested in cars, right? You're about ready to drive. Some of you can drive. So who cares about those? We care about cars. This is programmed securely for sure, right? No, it's not actually. So that particular Jeep is not secure, and that's why it showed up, because this was the one that they used to remotely disable its brakes while it was driving by the hacker, and then right into a ditch. And this was the actual demo of that functionality, so that's not good. And the latest thing is these driverless cars. This is a picture of the Google car. And so can you be sure that that thing is secure? Yeah, you can't. And if you look at all the processors and the network interfaces, all the sensors on that thing, you're like, wow, that's an enormous attack surface. And the one thing that hackers and adversaries love is a whole bunch of attack surface, because you have to rely on this car being secure on every single one of these interfaces, right? And that the software underneath is actually secure as well. This is a problem. We are just assuming that these things aren't hackable and allowing these things on the road. Okay, so some of the goals of the programming thread. We're going to teach you the basics of programming. We're not going to teach you how to securely program in 1 week. That's a little bit of a longer sort of run-up. But we are going to show you how, well, hopefully, you're going to understand how difficult it is to produce correct software, right? I want to shake your sort of belief that any software is completely secure. And then we're going to examine some of the pitfalls that happen when you trust software to operate correctly when in fact it doesn't. Okay. The next thread is the policy thread. So why are we looking at policy? So policy in cyberspace needs to address some of these emerging problems that's basically going to affect you individually and our country as a whole. One of these things is technology addiction, right? We just talked about this with the Pavlok. And the good news is only half of you are probably addicted to this. And I would say for the adults, it's about half of us too. I don't know why they singled out teens. It's pretty much everybody. And if it's not mobile devices, it's definitely video games. For at least males, it's the statistic that they did, or the study that they've done, where the amount of video gaming and recreational computer use has gone up 50% from 2004 to 2007, and then 50% again from 2012 to 2015. So as a society, we are now taking a lot of our productivity and plowing it into video games, and that has some implications. And the bad news is that this is all by design. Like if you go to a company developing software, like a consumer software product, their goal is to keep you connected as long as possible. So that's why they call it a slot machine in your pocket, because they are looking to reward you for using their app all the time. And this is tied into our physiology. We're all susceptible to this. So this is hitting basically your dopamine pathway for any of you budding neuroscientists out there. It's hitting that pathway. We're getting that like, and it's hitting our dopamine centers, and we're like, ah, that feels good. Let me do that. Let me get that again. And unfortunately, that's the same pathway that the opiates hit, right? So we're going to get a little fix. And this is why it's so hard to put the devices down. Because that's my fix. I was like, don't take that away from me, please. I get that. I have a teenage daughter, so I get that a lot. And so the worst thing is that teenagers are the most susceptible to this. And it's just the way physiology works. And so you're at a point where you can get addicted really quick. That's just, you're like the most vulnerable population. And so is there a better way? Well, some countries are acting on this. And so this is China's cure. One of their cures is to go and hack the teenager's computer and shut it down remotely. And so this is actually, of all of them, this is my personal preference. This is what I do to my daughter all the time. She'll like randomly go to YouTube and it'll say, you know, something's wrong with the security of your YouTube. You can't access it. And then she'll think it's the internet problem because the internet's so flaky that, yeah. She doesn't like the fact that I know about the internet. She wishes that she had a parent who didn't, actually. But should the government do anything about this? So is this something that we need to create policy for, or is this just personal responsibility? And that's something that a cyber policy person would think about, right? What is the best way to address this problem? So this should belong in the other slide. So South Korea has this Cinderella law, for example, where all the games shut off at midnight, and then they don't turn on until 6 in the morning. And they have some of the worst problems in internet addiction on the planet. They have people who like play 56 hours straight and then keel over and die in South Korea just because of the addictive nature of some of these games. Okay, so that's addiction. Another interesting area is vulnerability disclosure. So the government spends a lot of time figuring out what software is vulnerable that's being used by you and I. So the question is whether or not the government should be revealing these vulnerabilities to the software makers that are producing this software. And these software makers are US companies. And so shouldn't the US government be helping US companies fix their products? I mean, that's sort of why they pay taxes, I would imagine. And so this is a real debate because the policy for the government is to keep any vulnerabilities that they think they can use for their benefit. And former President Obama said, you know what? We'll release them unless they help us, helps the NSA. And so this is the kind of debate that is happening right now. There is no policy right now as to what the US government should do with these. The problem is they've been hoarding them, and they hoarded a whole bunch of vulnerabilities and then got broken into. So the Shadow Brokers group, roughly affiliated with the Russians, got a cache of our vulnerabilities, and then started releasing them into the world. So that sort of sucks. And then these vulnerabilities were then weaponized. So if any of you have heard of the WannaCry ransomware, this was basically derived off of those original vulnerabilities that the NSA found and decided not to tell the vendor. And so we ended up with a whole bunch of machines that didn't have patches for this vulnerability, and that's where WannaCry happened. Who do you think weaponized this vulnerability? Does anyone have a guess? So the NSA produced the vulnerability, but they didn't launch WannaCry. They would have been in real trouble if they actually had produced WannaCry. The Russians is one guess. North Korea. Oops, sorry. Yeah, this is weaponized by North Korea, and it's too bad. After North Korea weaponized it, it was then weaponized by criminals. And so Petya was a ransomware that went around encrypting things like hospital computers and then asking for a ransom back. So then the criminals just want to make money. After this, it was then weaponized by Russia. There's this not Petya variant. It was taken by Russia, weaponized to basically attack Ukraine. That's not in these slides. I should update these for the next time. So based on those original vulnerabilities, we now have this global problem of people using this malware to just wreak havoc in the world. And so then we go back to the original question. Like, were we safer with the NSA hoarding these things? Or would it have been better if they would have just told Microsoft, hey, you know what, you got a problem. Maybe you should look at fixing that so that we don't have these sorts of outbreaks. And that's a policy question that hopefully gets solved soon. Okay. Okay, so with the policy thread, we're going to look at the goals of the policy thread is to examine the impact that cyberspace has on developing policy for society, and then explore laws, policies, and programs that must change or be created for the cyber domain. So the vulnerability disclosure is just one of those. And then the last thread is the film thread. So why are we having you look at film? So throughout history, the arts have always influenced public awareness of computer science, the internet, and cybersecurity. One example of this is War Games, and this is a movie about thermonuclear war, and where a teenager hacks into the computers of the Central Command and almost gets us into nuclear war. And even though this was completely fiction, this actually led the following year to the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act getting passed. And as part of this law, they actually cite the movie as the reason why we need super harsh penalties against any sort of computer abuse. And we still have this law in effect today. So that if someone just pirates something, they're a felon, the CFA, under the CFAA. So this is one of the impacts that a film can have on cyberspace policy that's pretty immediate, within 1 year. Moreover, it had an impact on the sitting president at the time, Ronald Reagan, and an impact on nuclear disarmament. So Ronald Reagan saw both War Games and The Day After, which is the aftermath of a nuclear holocaust. And then this basically triggered his desire to disarm, to seek nuclear disarmament as a policy. And so within 1 year, he had re-engaged the Russians to try and reduce nuclear arms. And then in 1987, sort of towards the end of his second term, the first meaningful nuclear arms reduction happened as a result of this sequence. Okay, and so these are articles that you can read if you're interested in that that part of it. Another example is Mr. Robot. This is a recent TV series, and it's about a hacker who is doing things to really impact how society operates. And one of the things that cybersecurity people really like is how realistic every single security vulnerability and I guess technique that's being used in this TV show actually is. And this is really helping raise awareness of what can actually happen when you don't have secure systems. And they are taking it to the nth degree. And this is helping shape the conversation, shape the policy in Washington, D.C. The last one is Hidden Figures. This is the movie you're going to watch tonight. And it's about the women who are involved in the NASA effort to get a man into space. And Bob cited this statistic. If you see here, this red line is female participation in computer science. And we are way down from where we were before. And so one of the things about this movie is that it is shifting sort of perceptions. If you didn't know about this part, and if you didn't know the role that women had played in computer science from the very beginning, you might think this has always been a male-dominated field. And so one of the things about this movie is to bring to light the fact that what we're doing, what is happening right now is an anomaly. And this is what this camp is interested in shifting in terms of perception. Okay, so with film, we're going to learn some concepts. Michael is going to follow me right after. He's going to teach you some ways of producing impactful content using film techniques. And then we're going to have you practice creativity and your imagination so that you can produce some compelling films that communicate the importance of cybersecurity and policy. And that is all for threads. And so I'm going to wish you a great camp.